Hey, I'm Ted Possible, and I'm going to talk today about how I have learned to avoid tilt. Well, what is tilt? Tilt is an emotional reaction when you get a bad beat or something doesn't go your way or a bluff doesn't work, where you want to change your game to try to get chips as fast as possible, or you avoid getting in pots because you're scared that players might call you down. It's one of those extremes. So, how do you avoid this? You avoid tilt by, well, number one, and this is a big one. It's one of the biggest strategies we teach here. Not attaching yourself to outcomes. Well, how do you do that? Not attaching yourself to outcomes means that instead of thinking you're going to win a hand all of the time when you're in a 92-8, meaning 92% you win and 8% you lose, you start thinking about the hand as, I got this in as a 92% favorite, and that's it. I'm not gonna, if I win, lose, or draw, I was a 92% favorite, and you move on. And then whatever happens, you accept it. And in your mind, before the cards are laid down, whatever happens, you're saying to yourself, I'm going to accept the situation. I'm going to accept the situation. I know that 8% of the time here I lose. Whatever you have to say to yourself. So it's just like, this is the way it is. And then you accept the situation when it happens. This will prevent you from going on tilt, specifically for some type of expectation that you think you may win. The second way to avoid going on tilt is not trying to make fancy plays against an image that doesn't care about fancy plays. What do I mean by that? Well, if you go on a really elaborate bluff to a guy who's just playing his cards, it's not going to work. He's not thinking about what you have. He's thinking that he has a pair or an ace or whatever he has. He's not thinking about what you're doing. So it's important to calculate the image of the player you're going up against as best as possible in order to know how you're going to play. That's free, by the way. That's not a strategy we teach here. But it is important, image management, to also make sure you understand if he's able to determine what image you're playing. So what do I mean by that? So if he's not able to figure out that you bluff all the time and all he's doing is playing his top pair or his straight draws or his flush draws, you need to know that so you then can turn his image against him and use his cards against him to win the pot. So why is that important for tilt? Because if you are trying to label a person as something they are not, and then you expect them to do something, do not be surprised when they do the thing that they actually are. It's very important. This is very common where you run a really big bluff against a person who's going to call you with bottom pair, and you get mad because the bluff didn't work. Well, the bluff didn't work because the player wasn't paying attention. And you should also do this for other player types where the players won't be betting unless they actually have it. This is when I knock my head against the wall several times, and I did in this last tournament I played, is I tend to get very fancy with an ace-high board against a player who's never betting unless they have ace-high and a pair of aces or better. So that's me having to say, okay, he's betting, he's never bluffing in the spot, I'm going to let this go. This will avoid tilt because when you do fire off these bullets into this ace-high board and you do these really fancy plays again, once again, he's not folding his ace or aces and deuces when he hits it on the turn. So this would tilt you. And you might say things like, wow, great play, man. No, I should have known you couldn't get away from an ace. Yes, I should have known that he could not get away from an ace. And this will lead to less tilt. There is another form of tilt that a lot of people aren't familiar with. They think that tilt is usually big betting and trying to get chips back, getting super aggressive. But there's another form of tilt where you actually tighten up and start folding hands that you should be playing. So if you do that, it's pretty much the same effect as when you start betting big, only when you're aggressive and on tilt, you tend to make more chips than when you fold and on tilt. So are there any other tips, more tips to avoid tilt? Yes, there are. Another way of avoiding tilt is meditation. You can meditate and you can see yourself accepting things when they happen. You can use thought loops before hands are shown down to say, you know, I did the best I could. I set myself up in this situation. This is the best situation I could be in. I know that I'm a solid favorite, ... But you're not expecting an outcome. You're not attaching yourself to an outcome. You're just talking to yourself and logically processing what it is about the hand that you did well. And lastly, the way that you can avoid tilt is know that a 92-8 is not a 100-0. It's 92% of the time you will win and 8% of the time you will lose. And oh, by the way, if you're in pre-flop and you have ace-king against ace-jack, you have a 70-30, even if the flop comes deuce 3-5, you still have a 70-30, even though you have a gut shot on the flop. Anything that comes after all the money is in is always the percentages when the money went in. So if I have ace-king and you have ace-jack and I get it all in, it is always a 70-30. So it's fair for me to say in my head, I win this 70% of the time, I lose this 30% of the time without even looking at the board, and until the board runs out, when the board runs out, regardless of if you win or if you lose, you were a 70% favorite when you got it in. And you can also run some simulators to continuously get it in with 70-30s or 92-8s or 97-3, whatever you want, and just experience the times, the 3% of the time you lose the 97-3s, the 8% you lose the 92-8s, and the 30% you lose the 70-30. And this is how I avoid tilt. I also take very little stock in what other people say. And I don't mean about my play, I mean in general. Take very little stock, ignore that, and focus on the hand and playing it the best I can. And if this is how you play poker and you play the hand as best you can, you grade yourself on image control, emotional reaction control, not attaching yourself to an outcomes, and if you grade high on all those, you then win the hand instead of winning the hand at showdown. You're winning the hand in your head, and you're taking note of this. Then eventually, the more wins you put together, the more you're going to move ahead in tournaments or cash games. I'm specifically speaking about tournaments here. So those are the steps that I take to avoid tilt. The number one thing is not attaching myself to an outcome. The second thing is thought loops before the board comes out. The third thing is knowing exactly my odds and not thinking I'm a lock when I'm a 92-8 or a 70-30. Not mistaking my odds that I get it all in for odds later when more cards are shown. That means if you get it in pre-flop and the other guy's got a 70-30 dog, it's always a 70-30 dog no matter what happens. When he wins, that's fine, but he was always a 70-30 dog when he got the money in. And lastly, knowing a player will play like his type and not expecting him to play outside of his type. So I hope that helps you with tilt. I know it helps me. And if you have any questions, comment below, like, subscribe, and tell your friends. All right. I will update it after this weekend, after I play the 30-30-30 at Maryland Live. That's a $300 buy-in with a $30,000 guaranteed and $30,000 in starting chips. Thanks, guys. Have a good one. And remember, all things are possible